In 1979, representatives from a number of local agencies joined together around the identified need for a local emergency shelter for juveniles taken into temporary custody by law enforcement in Douglas County. That group wrote a grant for startup federal funding from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. In June of 1981, our first emergency shelter opened in the former Burt Nash Mental Health Center building at 342 Missouri, where it remains today. The City of Lawrence and many dedicated individuals were instrumental in the formation of our programming. In December of 1981, the Shelter Inc. was incorporated and a board of directors was assembled to administer the shelter program originally sponsored elsewhere. The Shelter Inc. has provided services to children and has been supported by a highly committed board of directors ever since. We have developed numerous services since that time. In 1987, we developed Juvenile Intake as a pilot program for the state, providing staff on call to law enforcement to help deal with juvenile cases as a part of the OJJDP initiative to keep children out of adult jails. This service was initially funded by a grant and was then funded by local city and county government. The state subsequently mandated the program statewide, funded through the Juvenile Justice Authority, and we continue to offer this service today. We have expanded the services available with funds from the City of Lawrence, providing families with services such as tutoring, treatment opportunities, and emergency assistance with housing and utilities. In 1996, we received our Child Placing Agency license so that we could start providing foster care and adoption services. This was the same time child welfare services were privatized in the state of Kansas. We continue to provide foster care services to this date and have supported and trained many loving and dedicated foster families throughout the years. In 1999, we stepped into prevention services when we began offering our pre-filing diversion and conditions of release supervision. This service offers supervision and support to avoid court involvement for alleged juvenile offenders, serving youth referred to us by law enforcement and the DA's office. That program was initially completely supported by OJJDP's Juvenile Accountability Block Grant funding. However, the county has stepped in and continues to support this program along with some sliding scale fees. In 2000, we opened our second emergency shelter, constructed specifically for that purpose and paid for in full by fundraised income. This brings the number of youth we are able to house in our residential program up to 28, with 2 police protective custody beds on any given day. Our most recent additions include 2 more prevention programs. Specialized Case Management started in 2005. This program is designed to provide an intervention for children whose behavior is putting them at risk for coming into custody as a result of a child in need of care, non-abuse neglect case. Our high school truancy prevention and diversion services started in 2008 at the request of the District Attorney's Office and Judge Gene Shepard. This program is designed to help keep children in school and out of the court system. Both Specialized Case Management and the high school truancy prevention and diversion programs are now funded by Douglas County. Along with developing services, we have also developed various methods of raising funds to be used to enhance our services. The Shelter Inc.'s first attempt at a fundraising event was a tennis tournament in 1983 between local doctors and lawyers. In 1984, we organized our Run for Shelter, held on Haskell's campus. While both of these events were very helpful in raising public awareness about our agency and the needs of our residents, we realized that we needed a larger scale event that could be held annually to provide resources beyond the income from our programs. In 1987, we met with representatives from Sheltered Living in Topeka, and they shared their organizational structure for their annual Festival of Trees. In December of that year, we held the first Lawrence Festival of Trees. Since that time, we have held this event each year, and it has become an important part of the holiday tradition in our community. The event is of critical importance to us, providing financial support for our services and creating public awareness and goodwill for our agency.
Early days at the shelter were a real learning experience for everyone involved. We had to hire staff. They didn't know each other. We had to put a board together. They were all very interested in kids, as were the staff that we hired, but everybody didn't know each other. Then we had to sort of find our place in the community, because since we had not been there in the past, why we needed to develop relationships with the school district. We were very fortunate to have interest from the school district by, members of the school district actually helping. Our first board president was the principal at West Junior High, Mick Lowe.
The meetings began with just the need to deal with emergency placements for adolescents. But the more we got together, the more and more we began to see the potential for what the shelter might ultimately become. And my goodness, it's become much more now with the vast array of services that are currently managed by the shelter than we ever envisioned at that time.
My first connection to the shelter was about 28 years ago when the shelter was part of the Children's Coalition. And the Children's Coalition came together really and put together the first visible children's agenda in the state working in the public policy arena. There were waiting lists for emergency shelters. It was difficult to find out and to understand where kids were on a Friday night. And that was my first connection with Judy Cully and the shelter as an executive director. She's always been, as has the shelter staff and board, a really strong voice for children and family in the state, and really helped put together the design of an ever-growing and new system of care for the state of Kansas.
As the shelter began to develop, it was just wonderful. It was so wonderful to have a facility in town. It was local. It was easy to get them for court hearings. It was easy for them to meet with parents and social workers and others involved in the case. I remember relatively young guardian ad litem, Gene Shepard, and also Went Winters Jr. were around and helping to support. They understood it well because we worked with them very closely. They would often represent the kids and even the parents in some of those early judicial proceedings. So they understood the problem very, very, very personally.
You know, in my view, the shelter hasn't changed over time at all in regard to the most important thing, and that's its mission. The shelter started as an organization to provide help, particularly emergency shelter care for children in need of care, what we used to call as abused and neglected children. But the mission, unfortunately, the need is still there, and it's continued on through the years. So, but the funding has changed. The way to get the revenues to take care of kids has dramatically changed. The need for even more nonprofit local fundraising has changed. But again, the constant is this organization exists to help kids, and everybody that I know, particularly Judy Cully, has effectively woken up for 35 years saying, let's go take care of these kids and families.
Not too long after I met Judy, and we worked on other things in the community, that I began to learn a lot about the shelter and her work at the shelter. And just in passing one day, she goes, I've got to come up with some kind of way to raise money for the shelter. And having come from Topeka in the 70s, I was well aware of their Christmas tree auction that they did. So I told Judy about it and told her about how volunteers would decorate trees and donate them, and how well it was attended in the business community, or by the business community. So I went to the board and presented the idea, and it was both Judy and I's belief that if anything like this could work, it would work even better in Lawrence, and it certainly did. So thousands of people have been involved in the Christmas tree auction for the shelter, and it's a beautiful story that continues today.
The shelter in general is a gem in the crown of Douglas County. I go back before the shelter when we didn't have the services that they provide today. And I remember arresting juveniles or picking up juveniles, people under 18 at night or on the street, and not having anywhere for them to go.
Under the old ways, somebody a juvenile would be, let's say, picked up for shoplifting or some minor crime, and it wouldn't be until after that case went through the district attorney's office before somebody finally figured out or got a hold of that kid to provide some services, and the shelter saw that, and staff brought that to the police department, convinced us to develop a program where we could try to get those kids seen by somebody, juvenile intake personnel, prior to the filing of charges. That way, perhaps even charges would never get filed if the person completed certain conditions, went to classes, understood what they were doing was wrong, or maybe there was something else going on in the home that was causing them to do that. So I think that's a great example of the shelter looking at current trends, working with law enforcement, and then in the end having a better outcome for kids.
Well, the relationship we have with the shelter is one of those relationships where it just really helps us do our job. It helps us serve the community by having a relationship outside our agency that works closely with kids in so many different ways, from juvenile offenders to child needed care cases to kids that are going through truancy matters. It gives us an extra arm out there to assist kids in a way that we can't necessarily do day to day in the courtroom.
The great thing about the shelter is that the board and Judy especially made sure that we continued to grow, and it has continued still. I believe it's gone from one house to 2 houses. They have adoption services now and foster care. It's just amazing how much they've grown.
I don't know, it's rewarding in that, just knowing that we can't help them all, but just the one that we do makes just a big difference in how knowing that some will take later on in life and call you back years later and say, hey, I remember this or that, that you told me. And that's, my reward.
I love the small town feel of the shelter. The shelter is like a little extension of our family by now. They kind of know when we have good days and bad days, just like our biological families do, maybe more. I can always call and vent. The employees stay around longer. They have been in the field a long time, and they know the system, and they are just totally committed to what they're doing.
Well, I would just say, I think most people that I talk to don't know how significant the need for foster parents is in the state of Kansas. The need for foster parents is significant, and you should just, if you are thinking about it, you should just take the class.
You really just do the best you can. And the shelter and other agencies will provide you with some more training tools. You have someone to go to. It is certainly an experiment at some level, but it's a benevolent one. And I find it very fulfilling, and I find it very, almost like a spiritual practice. As you talk to these children and treat them in a certain way, you have to treat yourself that way, and it becomes kind of a full circle. So I find it's meaningful on a really deep level as well.
The resources that the shelter provided our family, not just me, but our family, was spectacular, because a family looking at it from outside in, you wouldn't know where to go and get those. And the shelter helped my family and I get back together where we could talk, because that was not happening. I knew it all and they knew it all. Bullheaded, 2 bullheaded people meet and nobody gives, and so they taught us how to do that, and we needed that.
Well, I was an off and on resident at first, but then I became a permanent resident for about 6 months, I believe. I mean, it was a good experience for me. It wasn't bad at all. It provides stability, actually. Some of the kids I see come in, they come from places to where they don't know what's going to happen next. But they come to the shelter, and it's like, okay, they have a plan for me. They have access to a lot of resources when they come here. The health part of it is brilliant. Being that the health care for these kids, we get their dental and all their insurance taken care of. It's great. I love it. And I guarantee you, whoever wants to be a part of it, hey, y'all come to love it too.
I would really hope that the shelter makes a great deal of difference for individual people as they need help. That's what we're here to do. If the police pick up a kid who needs a placement and they need it right then, we want to be there. If a child is identified that has committed a crime, but it's a low-level crime and they really need a chance to not go through the court system and instead just kind of learn how to do things differently, why, we want to be there. We want to be there for folks who need some emergency assistance getting, say, a utility bill paid or whatever to keep them from being at risk of not providing adequately for their children. And we want to be there for kids who've been in the custody of the state for a long time and still need a place to be. I mean, we want to be there for every different kind of emergency. And I hope that that's what we've done that's been helpful.